The twin moons of New Terra hung low in the sky, their pale light casting long shadows over the once thriving colony. Just days ago, this had been a place of progress, a beacon of humanity's expansion into the stars. Now, the streets lay silent, broken only by the distant hum of alien patrol ships scanning the ruins for survivors. Smoke curled into the sky from shattered buildings, the scent of scorched metal and charred earth thick in the air. Dane Carter crouched behind a collapsed transit terminal, his breathing slow and measured. He clutched a rusted plasma rifle, an outdated model from a war long past, his fingers adjusting the grip as he surveyed the streets ahead. The Zelther Dominion had arrived with no warning, no pretense of diplomacy. Their warships darkened the sky, their ground forces sweeping through the colony with ruthless precision. Humanity had barely put up a fight. The planetary defense grid had been neutralized within hours. New Terra's proud military, outnumbered and technologically outmatched, had fallen by nightfall. Now, the surviving colonists were either dead, captured, or like Dane, hiding in the ruins, waiting for a chance that might never come. He shifted his position slightly, his knee brushing against a piece of shattered concrete. His body ached, a dull reminder of the last 3 days spent scurrying through the city's underbelly, scavenging what he could. His rations were running low. He had counted 6 patrols in the last hour alone. The Zelther were tightening their grip. A sudden metallic whirring sound sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. Dane pressed himself against the wall, eyes snapping toward the sound. A drone hovered a few feet away, its sleek, insect-like frame gliding through the air with eerie precision. Its glowing red optics scanned the area, searching. He held his breath. The drone emitted a sharp pinging noise and turned toward him. "Well, damn," Dane muttered. He fired before it could react, his shot striking the drone's sensory array. Sparks erupted from its casing, and the machine spiraled erratically before crashing into the rubble. But the damage was done. The patrols would have heard that. Dane sprinted down the street, his boots kicking up dust as he ducked into a half-collapsed apartment complex. He moved quickly, knowing he had only seconds before reinforcements arrived. He weaved through abandoned furniture, past photographs of families now lost to the invasion. A child's toy lay forgotten in the corner, its bright colors an eerie contrast to the decay. He reached the fire escape and scrambled upward, taking the rusted rungs 2 at a time. As he reached the rooftop, the distant hum of an approaching patrol ship grew louder. He flattened himself against the gravelly surface, peering over the edge. Below, a group of Zelther soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, their exoskeletal armor gleaming under the moonlight. Their elongated, segmented limbs made them unnervingly fast, their clawed hands gripping plasma rifles designed to burn through steel. One of them knelt by the fallen drone, clicking something in its guttural language. Another turned, scanning the area with cold, calculating eyes. Dane gritted his teeth. If they spread out, he was as good as dead. Then an explosion rocked the night. A ball of fire erupted from the eastern sector of the city, illuminating the sky in a brilliant flash. The Zelther soldiers jerked their heads toward the chaos, their communication devices buzzing. Orders barked in their alien tongue, and within moments, they were moving, abandoning their search for him in favor of the greater disturbance. Dane exhaled sharply. Someone else was still fighting. He had assumed he was alone, that resistance had died with New Terra's defenses. But if there was another group out there causing problems for the Zelther, he needed to find them. He climbed down the opposite side of the building and moved west, weaving through alleyways and shattered roads, careful to avoid the watchful eyes of drones and soldiers. He kept his grip firm on his rifle, though he knew it would do little against the Zelther's superior armor. He needed something better. By dawn, he reached the outskirts of the industrial district, where abandoned warehouses loomed like skeletal remains. This area had been the colony's main manufacturing hub, a place where mining equipment and agricultural machinery were built. Now it was eerily quiet. Dane slipped inside a warehouse, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. Rows of decommissioned cargo haulers lined the space, their rusting frames untouched by the invasion. But it was the far wall that caught his attention, an old security door, its control panel still faintly glowing. He crossed the room and pried the panel open, his fingers working instinctively. If this was what he thought it was. The door hissed open, revealing a hidden storage chamber. Inside, covered in dust and neglect, lay a cache of military-grade weapons. He let out a low whistle. Looks like Christmas came early. He wasted no time. He slung a new plasma rifle over his shoulder, pocketed spare energy cells, and grabbed a few grenades for good measure. The Zelther had taken everything from New Terra, but they had made a mistake, leaving him breathing. A noise behind him made him spin, his newly acquired weapon raised. A figure stepped from the shadows. A woman, her dark hair pulled into a tight braid, a welding torch in one hand and a pistol in the other. Her face was streaked with dirt, but her eyes were sharp, assessing him as quickly as he was assessing her. "If you're about to shoot, let me warn you. I shoot back," she said. Dane smirked. "I'd hate to ruin our first meeting like that." She lowered her pistol slightly, but didn't relax. "Who are you?" "Dane Carter. Just a guy who hates our new overlords." He gestured to her torch. "You some kind of engineer?" "Mira Vasquez," she said. "And yeah, before the invasion, I worked on industrial mechs. Now I make whatever weapons I can from scraps." Dane nodded toward the explosion in the distance. "That your work?" She gave a half-smile. "A group of us have been hitting their supply lines. Small stuff. Enough to make them angry." He looked at the weapons cache. "This changes things. We can do more than just make them angry." Mira studied him for a moment before nodding. "We could use more fighters." "Good," Dane said, "because I've got a score to settle." For the first time in days, he felt something other than exhaustion. He felt purpose. The Zelther had conquered New Terra with ease, believing humanity would simply bow like the other species they had enslaved. They had underestimated the resilience of their prey, and that was going to be their downfall. Dane crouched behind a rusted-out transport vehicle, watching the Zelther patrol move through the crumbling streets of Sector 9. They were faster than humans, stronger too, with chitin-plated bodies designed for war. But they weren't invincible. He had proven that 3 times this week. The Zelther had invaded New Terra expecting a swift, clean occupation. What they got instead was a resistance movement that refused to die. Mira knelt beside him, adjusting the makeshift targeting module on her plasma rifle. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, tightening a few loose components before giving him a sharp nod. "We take out the patrol, grab their comm units, and disappear before reinforcements arrive," she whispered. Dane smirked. "Sounds easy enough." From behind them, a low voice muttered, "That's what you said last time. And I still have burn scars." Dane turned to see Riker, a burly ex-miner clutching an old kinetic shotgun. The man's face was lined with exhaustion, his beard streaked with gray. Beside him, Vex, a wiry scout who used to work in orbital security, loaded a fresh charge into her pistol. The 4 of them were all that remained of a larger group that had been whittled down over the past few weeks. "Relax," Dane said. "This time, we actually have a plan." Mira rolled her eyes. "That's what you said last time, too." Dane grinned, but said nothing. The Zelther soldiers passed beneath the ruined overpass, their elongated bodies casting shadows in the moonlight. They moved in formation, their rifles humming with barely contained energy. There were 4 of them, 2 carrying standard pulse rifles, one with a heavy repeater, and the last wearing a command insignia on his armor. He would have the data they needed. Dane exhaled slowly, steadied his rifle, and squeezed the trigger. The first Zelther went down in a flash of red light, a sizzling hole where its head used to be. Before the others could react, Riker's shotgun roared, sending another sprawling backward. Myra's shot took the third, one high in the chest, its carapace splitting open in a wet crack. The commander spun, raising his repeater, but Vex was already on him. She lunged from the shadows, slashing a combat knife through the gaps in his armor. He let out a shrill, alien cry before collapsing, ichor pooling beneath his twitching limbs. Silence followed, save for the distant echoes of the city. Mira was the first to move, yanking the commander's comm unit from his belt and scanning its data. Her brow furrowed as she read the encrypted files. "They've tightened patrol routes," she murmured. "And damn, they're doubling security around their energy processing facility." Dane leaned in. "That means it's important. Or it means they know we're getting bolder." Vex wiped her blade clean and smirked. "So we hit it before they expect us to." Riker grumbled. "We're stretched thin as it is. Another big move like this, and we risk losing everything." Dane met his gaze. "If we let them lock down the facility, we'll never get another chance. That plant powers their command post, their defenses, their entire operation here. We take it out, and they'll be scrambling for weeks." Mira hesitated, then sighed. "He's right. Of course I'm right." Dane gestured to the bodies. "I mean, look at these guys. Overconfident, predictable, and just a little too arrogant. Honestly, they remind me of corporate executives." Vex snorted. "Except executives don't vaporize people on site. Depends on the corporation." Riker let out a weary sigh. "Fine, but if this goes bad, I'm blaming you." Dane clapped him on the shoulder. "Wouldn't have it any other way." They moved quickly, disappearing into the ruins before the Zelther could send reinforcements. By dawn, they had returned to the underground tunnels where the rest of the resistance waited. The tunnels stretched beneath the city, remnants of an old maintenance system that had once connected the colony's power grid. Now they served as shelter for those who had refused to surrender. Families huddled in makeshift camps, their faces gaunt from hunger. Children played with whatever scraps they could find, their laughter a rare sound in a world that had forgotten joy. Dane walked through the crowd, nodding to those he recognized. These people had lost everything, yet they still fought. He wouldn't let that be for nothing. Mira spread out a map of the energy facility on a metal crate, pointing to key weak spots. "This is where we plant the charges. If we hit the primary fusion core, the entire plant will go offline. No power means no shields, no comms, and no fancy alien tech keeping them in control." Vex traced a path with her finger. "Security will be heaviest here, near the central conduit." Dane leaned over the map. "Then we go in quiet. No firefights unless we have no choice." Riker scoffed. "Since when do things ever go according to plan?" Dane grinned. "We're overdue for some good luck." That night, they moved under the cover of darkness, weaving through the ruins toward the facility. The building loomed ahead, a monolithic structure of alien metal and humming energy conduits. Zelther sentries patrolled the perimeter, their glowing visors slicing through the night like predatory eyes. Dane signaled, and Vex moved first, slipping through the shadows. She disabled the outer security grid with practiced ease, allowing the others to move in. They crept past the guards, hugging the walls until they reached the main entrance. Mira worked fast, bypassing the alien locking mechanism. The door slid open with a faint hiss, and they slipped inside. The interior pulsed with an eerie, blue glow. Massive generators lined the walls, feeding energy into the heart of the Zelther war machine. The hum of machinery vibrated through Dane's bones as they moved deeper into the facility. They reached the central conduit without issue. Mira knelt, setting the charges while Dane kept watch. His fingers tightened around his rifle. Something fell off. Then an alarm blared. Dane spun, cursing as security turrets dropped from the ceiling. Plasma fire rained down, forcing them to dive for cover. Zelther soldiers poured in from every entrance, their weapons flashing in the dim light. "Ambush!" Riker roared, returning fire. Dane gritted his teeth. "Mira, tell me those charges are ready." "Almost there." Vex darted forward, cutting through the first wave of soldiers with lethal precision. Dane fired into the chaos, covering Mira as she worked. Then, a deafening explosion rocked the facility. The charges detonated, sending a shockwave through the structure. Alarms wailed. The walls cracked. Energy conduits ruptured, sending arcs of electricity dancing through the air. "The whole place is coming down," Riker shouted. They sprinted for the exit as the facility imploded behind them. The heat seared Dane's back, but he didn't stop running. They burst into the open air just as the plant collapsed in on itself, a fireball consuming the sky. The city trembled. For a long moment, No one spoke. Then Mira exhaled. We did it. Dane stared at the burning remains. Yeah, but now they'll come for us. The Zelther wouldn't take this lightly. They would strike back, harder than ever. Dane tightened his grip on his rifle. Let them come. The ruins of New Terra burned beneath an ominous sky, columns of black smoke rising like funeral pyres. The destruction of the energy facility had sent shockwaves through the Zelther ranks, throwing their operations into chaos. But chaos did not mean surrender. If anything, the enemy had become more relentless. The retaliation had been swift and merciless. Raids on suspected hideouts, executions of captured rebels, and an increase in surveillance that made movement near impossible. The streets crawled with patrols, and the once fractured occupation now moved with deadly focus. Dane stood atop the remnants of an old comms tower, his rifle slung across his back, watching a convoy roll through the main boulevard below. Zelther troops, moving in formation, their exoskeletal armor reflecting the dim red glow of emergency beacons. They were heading toward the command citadel, the heart of their occupation, an impenetrable fortress carved into the colony's central district. If they wanted to finish this war, that was where they needed to strike. Footsteps behind him signaled Myra's approach. She looked exhausted, her face drawn, dark circles under her eyes. They all were running on fumes. The resistance had dwindled to a fraction of what it had been. Vex was gone, lost in the chaos of a failed supply raid. Riker had taken a shot to the leg and was barely mobile. The people still standing were those who had nowhere left to run. They know it was us, Mira said, coming to stand beside him. They hit the tunnels an hour ago. Cleared everything. We have maybe a dozen fighters left. Dane's jaw tightened. Then we take out the warlord before they finish us off. Mira let out a quiet, humorless laugh. You say that like it's a simple thing. He turned to her. We've been fighting in the dark, picking at the edges, hoping to bleed them enough to make them leave. It's not working. They're still here. They're still winning. We end this now, or we die waiting for them to do it for us. Mira studied him for a long moment. Ow! Dane knelt, spreading a map over the cracked floor of the tower's remains. The command citadel was heavily fortified, surrounded by an energy barrier powered by an auxiliary generator, one of the few systems still functioning after their last strike. But no structure was perfect. He traced his finger along the western perimeter. There's an old maintenance tunnel here, buried under the rubble of Sector 5. It leads straight to the Citadel's lower levels. If we can get inside, we plant charges on the command core. Blow it from the inside. Mira shook her head. The tunnel's unstable. Even if we make it through, we'll be facing an entire garrison. That's not a battle. It's a death sentence. Dane met her gaze. We're already dead if we don't try. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Mira exhaled sharply. I'll get the explosives. That night, the remnants of the resistance gathered in what was left of their underground network. The 12 who remained were hardened, silent. There were no speeches, no grand declarations of defiance. They had been fighting too long, losing too much to waste words. The journey through Sector 5 was slow, the rubble shifting beneath their feet as they picked their way through the ruins. The tunnel entrance was buried beneath a collapsed transport station, but with effort, they cleared a path, slipping into the darkness below. The air was thick with dust and the scent of damp metal. The walls groaned around them, ancient supports barely holding under the weight of the destruction above. They moved in single file, weapons ready, knowing that if the Zelther had found this tunnel first, they were walking into an ambush. Minutes stretched into an eternity before they reached the other side. The tunnel opened into a lower maintenance bay, dimly lit by flickering emergency lights. Dane peered around the corner, spotting a pair of Zelther technicians working at a console, oblivious to the danger. He signaled to Mira. In a swift, practiced movement, they eliminated both before they could sound an alarm. The path to the command core was lined with security checkpoints, but the chaos outside worked in their favor. Most of the Zelther forces had been redirected to hunt the remaining rebels, leaving the interior less fortified than expected. They moved quickly, bypassing locked doors with scavenged access cards, disabling surveillance feeds where they could. Finally, they reached the core chamber. It was vast, a cathedral of alien technology pulsing with raw energy. At its center, a massive conduit pulsed with power, linking the command systems to every Zelther unit in the field. If they destroyed it, the enemy's entire network on New Terra would collapse. Mira knelt beside the structure, setting the explosives with careful precision. The others fanned out, securing the exits. Dane kept his rifle trained on the main corridor, listening to the distant echoes of movement. Then a low, rumbling voice filled the chamber. "I expected you sooner." Dane turned as High Warlord Score emerged from the shadows. Taller than the others, his plated armor reinforced with ceremonial etchings, his 6 eyes glowing with an eerie, intelligent malice. He moved with a calculated grace, a predator at the peak of its evolution. The remaining Zelther guards moved to flank him, but Score raised a clawed hand, stopping them. His gaze remained fixed on Dane. "You have been a persistent nuisance, human." His mandibles twitched in what might have been amusement. "I must admit, I admire it. But this ends now." Dane raised his rifle. "Yeah, it does." Score moved fast, faster than something his size had any right to. Dane barely got a shot off before the warlord was on him, striking with enough force to send him crashing into the bulkhead. His vision blurred as pain flared through his ribs. He rolled to the side, just as Score's blade-like claws tore through the spot where he had been. Mira fired, but the warlord twisted, the shots ricocheting off his armor. He lunged at her, and Dane forced himself to move, slamming his rifle against the creature's head, throwing him off balance. Score turned on him, and they grappled, the warlord's strength nearly overwhelming. Dane reached for his belt, fingers closing around the hilt of a combat knife. With a desperate yell, he drove it into Score's throat. The warlord let out a strangled hiss, his claws tightening around Dane's arm before finally going slack. The body collapsed to the floor, motionless. Dane staggered back, chest heaving. Mira finished setting the explosives. The countdown began. The remaining rebels took defensive positions as the first wave of Zelther reinforcements poured into the chamber. Plasma fire erupted from all sides. Dane fired until his rifle overheated, until his hands were slick with sweat and blood. The timer on the charges ticked down. 10 seconds. "Go!" Mira shouted. They ran. The explosion ripped through the citadel with the force of a dying star. The ground buckled. The walls cracked. Dane barely made it through the collapsing corridors before the entire structure imploded behind them. They emerged into the night as the citadel burned. The Zelther forces, cut off from their command, fell into disarray. For the first time since the invasion began, the sky above New Terra was silent. Dane dropped to his knees, exhaustion crashing over him. Around him, the last of the resistance stood, staring at the flames. The battle was over, and humanity had won.